Welcome to the Church 247 TV on the Now Television Network. My name is Jeri Sprewell, and this is Let's Testify, Episode 1. I think it's very important. One of the things, if I were to have a title to my testimony, I believe my title would be Things Are Not What They Seem. It's not what it looks like. And the reason why I say that is because growing up, well, let me start here. I am my mother's only child. But on my father's side, I have several brothers and sisters whom, I wasn't raised with them. I was raised as an only child with my mom and my stepfather, who married my mother when I was the age of 8. So as I was coming up, I was between two houses, between the house of living with my stepfather and my mom. And I spent my weekends and my summers with my grandparents in the city of Wilmington, California, where on that side of the family back then there were 7 uncles and 3 aunts. And one of my aunts, I call her my auntie mama because she was 12 years old when I was born, and I was mainly her responsibility when I would go there on the weekends. So she's more like a mom to me. But so the things that were going on as I was being raised and in the house with my mom and my stepdad, there was a lot of violence. There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol. And the violence, the domestic violence, it was not only with towards my mom, but it was also towards me as well. The way that the neighborhood that we were raised in the city of Compton, so people think of Compton as being, they think of gangs and, things like that. But back then in the 70s, the city of Compton, it was borderline. You had a lot of more Caucasian families that lived in that area. There weren't many African-American families there. And we were what you would call a middle-class family. The jobs were good. My mom worked for Max Factor in Hawthorne, California. My stepdad, before he became a longshoreman, he was actually an inspector at Garrett Air Research. And he was one of the inspectors for the Apollo 13. Some people might not remember that, but yeah, he was an inspector. So he was a very intelligent, man. And he was well groomed and well dressed. And so being middle class, we lived in a nice home in the city of Compton. And from the outside looking in, you wouldn't think of the things that were going on behind the closed doors. Behind the closed doors, my stepdad, he was a heroin addict. He was an alcoholic. My mom was addicted to, back then they called it PCP or Sherm Lovely. They had many names for PCP back in the day. But they were what people would call functioning addicts. They were people that you couldn't tell, looking at them looking middle class and well dressed, and even their verbiage, the way that they spoke, it wasn't like, how someone would look at an African American person and, and have the slang language. It wasn't like that. And so there was a lot of drugs going on behind the closed doors. And many times there were situations in the home where I remember where my mom would be so under the influence of drugs, where pills, marijuana, alcohol, PCP, where sometimes I even had to feed her, try to make her, eat. That's how under the influence that she would be. My stepfather, he wasn't one of those heroin addicts where most people think that a heroin addict, that they scratch and they nod and go to sleep. That wasn't the type that he was. He was one that he talked a lot. He talked a lot, and he had what I used to call the gift of gab. And so he would amp up when he was under the influence of heroin. So it was hard to tell. It was hard to tell, when he was, under the influence. And so behind closed doors, a lot of things that happened was the beatings. I spent years watching him beat my mom. And it was scary. It was a scary situation. And because I would also be beaten, and most of the time he would beat me with extension cords, or he would take switches and peel them and put them in water. Or if he get, the closest thing to put his hands on would be a vacuum cleaner cord, then he would use that. And the reasonings that he would have, he was a person that was very clean. He wanted everything done in perfection and excellence. If he were to go into the kitchen and reach into the cabinet and go to pull a skillet out of the cabinet, and the handle might feel greasy, and he would proceed to pull all the dishes out of the cabinet, and he would come and wake me up beating me. Not wake me up and start to beat me, but wake me as he's beating me. And because of the grease on the skillet handle, and I would have to get up in the middle of the night and wash every pot and pan that there is, and even change the paper in the cabinet. So there was a lot of cleaning that I had to do. We had lots of crystal and glasses, and I always had to pull the glasses and crystal out and make sure that there were no spots and no dust. And so I was the one who kept everything clean. When it came to mopping a floor, I was not allowed to use a mop. I had to scrub the floor on my hands and knees. And back then we had sinks that had tile, little square tile with the little white, I don't know what you would call it in between the tile, but I used to have to use a butter knife to scrape that and make sure that was clean. And we had porcelain sinks, and so if anything like a skillet would scuff the sink, it would be a little gray mark. And I've been awakened, out of my sleep because of a scuff mark in the sink, and I'd be accused of not cleaning the sink, and so there were many beatings like that. I have a memory of before we moved into this home. We moved in an apartment complex, also in the city of Compton, and we lived on the second floor. And my mom was being beat, and she went to break out of the house and made it to the balcony, to the porch, and he was right behind her, and I was right behind him, and he had a shotgun, and he was holding it to her head, and he was screaming at me while she was trying to get away, and he was saying, he said, "Jeri, you better tell your mom to get back in here. I'm going to blow her head off." And I'm screaming, and I'm saying, "Mom, please come back in the house." So these are I'm just sharing some of the traumatic things, and I'm a kid, I'm a little girl, so, to think of, all these different traumatic experiences, that a child goes through. There's another memory of my mom. After leaving work one time, she smoked some of her PCP Sherm, whatever it was called then, and got lost and ended up going towards and real close to San Francisco in her car. And she was gone, lost for a couple of days, and I'm there stuck with him and listening to the phone ring. And at one point, I remember she finally was able to actually reach you know, the home. And he answered the phone, and he ended up hanging up on her. And he took a rope, and he made a noose, and he took the noose and he hung it on the patio over the beams. And he told me, when your mom comes home, I'm gonna hang her. I'm gonna kill her. And at some point I was, you know, I don't know how long it took me, a day or two, or how long it took me to be able to actually go to a neighbor's house and call my grandma, my mom's, the maternal grandma, and let her know that my mom had been missing. So these are just some of the things, you know, of my memories, and that were going on in the house. Here's another. I had a certain time to be home from school, and he would actually check and see how far away the school was from the home, and he would gauge. He had his own gauge as to how long it should take me to get home from school. So I had a certain time from the time that the bell rang, you know, to be home from school. I was not able, like some children, when you're on your way home from school, you might stop at the store and buy you a bag of potato chips or some candy or something. Not me. I was half walking and half running home to make sure that I would get home. And sometimes he would even be following me. He would be like a block behind me in the car, just creeping along, watching to see if I was going to detour, you know, and stop anywhere on the way home. And I remember one time when we had moved from the apartment complex to the new home in Compton, and I was in junior high school, and it was the beginning of my junior high school. Back then, junior high school started in the 7th grade, the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th. And so, you know, I was on a new schedule, and I got home from school that day, and he was on the roof, working on the roof, and he came in the house, followed me in the house, and asked me, "Why are you late?" And I had to call him Daddy. And so I'm like, "Daddy, I'm not late. You know, I came straight home from school. I didn't stop." And so he proceeded to beat me. And afterwards is when he decided to call the school to see what time they let out. And that's when he made his calculations and found that in actuality I was not late, according to his calculations. And I remember later that day, because sometimes I would just go and just sit, you know, on the porch. And when my mom came home, he actually had my mom to come out and to apologize to me. And that was that incident. I was the one who did everything. I did the cleaning, I did the washing, I did the ironing. Back then, we didn't have a lot of use of dryers, so I would hang the clothes out on the clothesline. And one time, I couldn't find the clothespins, and only he and I were home alone. And I asked him, you know, did he move them? And he's like, "Well, no. What did you do with them?" And I'm like, "Well, maybe Mother put them up." And he says, "Does your mother ever do anything?" And I was like, "No, Daddy." And at that moment, that's when his hand, it just came so fast and hit me, and my nose started to bleed. And my aunt, the one I was telling you about, that was 12 when I was born, on my dad's side of the family, she tells me that this lump that I have in my nose wasn't always there. And I actually believe that that's when that happened. I don't know if my nose was broken or what, but I know I wasn't taken to the doctor for it. It was, you know, the nosebleed from it. And then with that situation, when my mom came home that time, and she had put up the clothespins. And once again, you know, he was sent to apologize. So all these things, there's just so many things that happened in this house. And from the outside looking in, like I said, a person would never think, because we were well dressed, we had nice cars, we had a nice home, and you know, everything was just so wonderful, you know. And it's like I felt like that little Cinderella, you know, while all the other stepsisters were going to the ball, you know, I'm at home scrubbing the floors on my hands and knees. But nobody would think that, you know. People would look at me, and because I was an only child, and because things looked so nice, you know, from the outside looking in, that they thought that, you know, I had it all spoiled, and just, you know, total opposite, total opposite. I had to prepare meals. I was taught how to cook. He was an excellent chef. He was a chef. He was an inspector at Garrett Air Research, and he actually ended up being a longshoreman, a Class A book longshoreman. And the way that he was able to do that is because back in that day, they didn't have women that were longshoremen. And my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, he was a longshoreman. And with my mom being his only child, she wasn't able to get my grandfather's book. So he passed the book on to his son-in-law, my stepdad. So that's how he was able to become a longshoreman. They made very good, had very good income with that. So with him being a longshoreman and me being the main person, you know, that cleaned and cooked, and everything had to be in excellence. He worked in different restaurants in different times in his life, and we had tablecloths and cloth napkins, and there was a certain way that the napkins had to be folded, and a certain way that the table had to be set, and you had to know where to set the water glass and the wine glass, and the proper way to lay the silverware on the napkins on the table. And when it came dinner time and when we ate together, you had to make sure and place your napkin in your lap, and when you eat, you wipe your mouth and you fold your napkin and you put it back on your lap, and you keep your elbow off the table. And that was the way that we had to eat, in a proper manner. And you didn't speak until you were spoken to at the dinner table. So, and so there wasn't a lot of communication, but whenever I remember whenever he might say something like, well, how was your day? You know, what's on your mind? What are you thinking? And my heart would just race. My heart would race because I wouldn't know how, you know, to answer, you know, what is he looking for, you know, in asking me any questions. And so I lived under a lot of stress and a lot of fear, and a lot of, you know, you don't know what's going to happen next, what's going to trigger him, you know, to want to hit you or beat you. And I used to have to iron his clothes. I ironed his clothes, and I had a certain way. He taught me how to fold tiles a certain way, and how to place those in the cabinet a certain way in the sheets, and how to fold the tablecloths and the napkins. And I had to keep the cabinets nice and neat. And I had to match his clothes. I had to match his whenever, you know, he did wear ties and things sometimes, not as a longshoreman, but when he would go out other places, I had to keep his clothes matched, and I had to make sure that the creases in his shirts and his pants were done correctly. And I had to run his bath water. I had to make sure that I knew what time that he would get off work, and so I had to make sure and run his bath water at the proper timing, so that when he would get home from work, that it would still be warm for him. I knew the sound of his truck. We had a truck, we had a Volvo, we had a sports car, I forget what kind it was, but everything that he drove, I knew the sound. And whenever I would hear the sound of whatever he was driving that day, most of the time I would be, you know, everything would be done. The dishes washed, everything clean, his bath water ran, and I would be sitting on the end of my bed in my bedroom, my heart racing, and I would be sitting there just waiting on him to scream my name, because I didn't know, was it something that I didn't do wrong, do right? I mean, so I would, be in a panic, wondering, what today was going to be like with him coming home. And so that was mainly the life. That was the life of panic and just, everything I saw, and, with just everything. And so here I had that going on in that home. And then on the weekends and during the summer, when I would go to my grandparents' house on my biological father's side, my paternal grandparents, it was more freedom there. On that side of the family, my grandmother was the church mother, and so with that I say, because we were in church, we were in church constantly, and so for me, that is where my foundation came, of learning about the Lord, learning about God, learning who Jesus was, and learning how to even call on him, when you need him. That's where my foundation was. And so for the most part, we were always in church. Like I said, my summers and my weekends were spent at my grandparents' house there. And on that side, we have a lot of music. We're a musical family. We play instruments, we sing. And as a matter of fact, my grandparents, they met because they were both in different gospel groups. And as they were traveling in their different groups, that they ended up meeting, and that's how they became one. So we have a lot of musical talent, and it's really a great outlet, in our family, and getting to know about God. But at the same time, on that side of the family, I experienced being molested. So, and, I believe coming through being a person that came up being molested on one side of the family, and on the other side, you got the beatings going on. Even with coming out of, now, no, I might be going just a little bit ahead of myself, but I just feel the need to say this right here. I don't feel the need to identify my molester. I believe that everyone has the right to ask God for forgiveness. I don't care. I don't care whatever your sin was, whatever your challenges was. Everybody has that right. And so for that reason, I don't identify my molester in any type of way. But I was, as a little girl, I don't know when it started. I don't know when it ended. But those are the things that I was experiencing on that side of the family, was being molested, and there was alcohol use on that side of the family, and there was a lot of fighting and abuse even on that side. And we had a large family on that side, but yet there was a lot of love. There was a lot of love. There was a lot of giving on that side. That side of the family, I remember that we did a lot of celebrating. We did a lot of, like, say for instance, even as adults, if you were in church, at the end of the service, you might say, hey, where are you going after church? Oh, I'm going to the house. We used to call my grandparents' house the house. And some of us, if we didn't live there, we would, go home first and change our clothes. And, everybody would come to the house, to the grandparents' house. And you would have some that, some would be eating, some would be watching TV, some of us would be playing games, but it was like just a gathering place. And, you had different people in the neighborhood that would love to, you know, come down to the Sprewell house, you know, and my granddaddy and grandma, you know, granddaddy would be like, hey, you know, you hungry? Go in there and get you something to eat. You know, that was just the way that they treated, you know, the neighbors. And when we would have different occasions, holidays, and, you know, just get together sometimes, and there was a piano in the dining room, and we would just play. We would play and we would sing, and, you know, people would come and they would just be gathered, and, you know, just to be a part, you know, of that. You know, my grandparents, they were givers, and our family on that side, we're givers. We're givers, and we are, you know, even with the fussing and the fighting and the, you know, the alcohol use, you know, and whatever, you know, back in that day, we could fight with each other, but don't you try to come in and fight us, because we're going to protect one another. But I found there was more love on that side of the family for me, to me. And there was not, you know, for me, not a lot of judgment, you know, on that side. And that, I'm saying that as I became older, because what happened was when I became older, my stepfather, he actually, there's so many things that happened when they were, you know, him and my mom were married, and they ended up separating, but he was still with her even when I turned 18 and I graduated high school. He was still with her. And then, but at some point, I moved away. My grandmother helped me to find my first apartment. But while I was living there, my stepfather ended up leaving, and it was just my mom and myself there. But my mom was still addicted more to PCP than anything, and she was still addicted. And at some point, I had started going out and going out to clubs, skating, whatever, you know, different things. And I met my first child's father at a rolling rink, and so I ended up having my first child at the age of 20. And so with that, I ended up getting my own apartment. My grandmother helped me. My maternal grandmother helped me to move away. I got my own